This episode has been supported by UKRI as part of the annual Festival of Social Science. Each year this festival celebrates the amazing research and advancements of our best and brightest social scientists. Hundreds of events are running all over the country from the 19th of October to the 9th of November, and this year's theme is Our Digital Lives. Case S02E10, bot or not. It's mid-morning on Monday, the 15th of January 2024. The sky is clear, and as the temperature steadily rises towards 25 degrees C, that's about 77 Fahrenheit, the air shimmers above 6 lanes of inner city traffic. Looking down over the cars, bikes, and hot pavement is a building that dwarfs many of the structures around it, not so much in height, but mainly in sheer footprint. Above ground, 3 floors, black, brown, and white, each sit, one on top of the other, none of them quite flush. Out of sight below ground are a further 4 basement levels. This is Festival Walk, a 1 million square foot shopping centre in Kowloon Tong, close to the heart of Hong Kong. Among its hundreds of shops, it is home to the usual suspects: Calvin Klein, Juicy Couture, Hollister, and of course it has a multiplex cinema, an atrium, and an ice rink. It may be huge and architecturally quirky, but it's also just like many other malls worldwide, and perhaps most importantly, it's not really the scene where you might expect a state-of-the-art, multi-million-dollar online fraud to take place. But Festival Walk isn't just one of the world's largest retail real estates. As if to emphasise its overall geometric irregularity, at one end of the building, a further 4 floors of crisp black glass rise from the mall's roof, an extra 250,000 square feet of office space available for rent. If you have the credentials to pass through the marble-style entrance lobby and secure smart gates, the acutely angled floors of Festival Walk Office Tower are tenanted by a range of businesses and users, from little co-working startups to the City University of Hong Kong. And at the top rung of this striking commercial ladder, we find Arup. Who, you might ask, is Arup? Well, it's a multinational consultancy that turned over £1.9 billion of revenue, that's nearly 2.5 billion US dollars, in 2022 alone. And this is where the story of our heist begins. Welcome to On Clair, an archive of forensic linguistics, literary detection, and language mysteries. You can find case notes about this episode, including credits, acknowledgements, and links to further reading at the blog. The web address is given at the end of this podcast. If you've never heard of Arup before, don't worry. It's not the sort of business the average person has day-to-day dealings with. To simplify a long history into a few words, the Arup acorn was planted in London in 1946, when Sir Ove Arup founded a professional consultancy for the built environment. As the years passed, this provided an increasing number of services ranging from design and engineering to architecture and planning, and opened offices all over the world. You may not have heard of Arup, but you've probably heard of at least a few of its biggest projects, such as Apple Park in North America, that's the corporate headquarters of Apple, Aspire Tower in Qatar, the Sydney Opera House in Australia, and in the UK alone, the Shard, the Gherkin, the London Eye, and the Millennium Bridge. If you're not sure what that is, that's the bridge in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince that the Death Eaters spiral around and destroy as they fly away through London with a captive. Arup has been involved in everything from sports stadiums and bus stations to TV studios and coastal seaports, banks, bridges, arenas, libraries, galleries, sculptures, terminals, Like I said, Arup's bread and butter tends to be projects at a scale that the average person is simply not involved in. The inner clockworks of a platinum-tier multinational like Arup might be a mystery to most of us, but for one enterprising outfit, Arup's Hong Kong office is not only on their radar, they have been researching it for some time now. And they have just clicked send on a handful of emails to Arup employees working in Festival Walk office tower. As those emails flit across cyberspace, weather warnings arrive for a possible monsoon, but no one knows that over the coming week, the temperature is about to plunge below freezing, and not just metaphorically. One of Arup's employees is frowning at the email. For ease, we're going to call that employee Zhang. For the record, I have no secret information that this is their name, but we need to call them something, and this name means river. You can read something into that if you want to, but I just thought it was a pretty name. Back to Zhang's email. It's come all the way from London headquarters, and not just anyone. It's Arup's Global Chief Financial Officer, Rob Boardman. He wants an important task doing, but it requires discretion. For a moment, Zhang is doubtful. It sounds just a bit odd. Has the CFO really just? No, surely not. But then comes the clincher. Boardman has scheduled an online video conference. He will be there himself, personally, to explain and to give instructions. And any remaining worries are put to rest. Boardman is going to oversee the matter directly, and who is our little Hong Kong employee to argue with someone of this seniority? Questions could trigger shameful recriminations or even career-ending fury. If Boardman will be on this call, what more proof could anyone want? Sure enough, Zhang joins the call, and Rob Boardman himself is on camera along with several other recognisable senior Arup figures and a few outsiders. It is a terse meeting. Zhang is asked to introduce themselves and accordingly does so, but this is not a social occasion. No one is here to chit-chat. There is big money business to be done, and quickly. Zhang is given a series of instructions for making 15 bank transfers to 5 different Hong Kong accounts, totaling 200 million Hong Kong dollars. That's about £20 million or 26 million US dollars. And then the call abruptly ends. But though the meeting is over, the communication doesn't stop. Boardman and the others continue with instructions and commands, sometimes sending emails, sometimes using instant messaging, and sometimes appearing in one-to-one video calls. But as these missives come in, gradually the voice of doubt revives itself. What if something irregular is happening here? Why do they need this money transferring in such an odd way? Rob Boardman is the CFO, one of the most powerful people in this massive, global, billion-dollar multinational. Doesn't he have someone in London to do this? A dozen someones. Couldn't he even do it himself? Are legitimate instructions to move huge sums of money into different bank accounts really sent by instant messenger to far less senior people in faraway offices? What if something is afoot? Will Zhang be the one held responsible? Could they get fired? Might there even be criminal charges? Finally, the tension and uncertainty become unbearable. The risk is too high. The balance between respectful deference and self-preservation tips. Zhang writes an email to London HQ, takes a breath, hits send. It's done, for better or for worse. Now there is just the wait, refreshing the inbox, praying, hoping, fearing. And there it is, a reply from HQ. No, Mr. Boardman has taken part in no such video calls. No, Mr. Boardman definitely has not requested multiple large transfers to different bank accounts. Yes, this has all been an elaborate scam, and an enterprising criminal outfit has just escaped with 200 million Hong Kong dollars. Everyone has been there. The screw-up so monumental that we feel like the waters of shame will close over our heads forever and never let us back up for air. I'm not talking about malicious actors, but innocent, hard-working people doing their jobs, and something, somehow, slips through the net. In 2024 alone, there was the poor soul who released the CrowdStrike update and tanked half the computers around the globe, including grounding flights and shutting hospitals. You know that feeling that goes through you when you realise you've screwed up, and screwed up big. On that basis, I want to give Zhang every possible defence. Is it possible that they were a bit daft? Sure, I have days where I'm daft too. But they were also at an immediate disadvantage. It isn't easy in many cultures, and especially for those with certain histories or certain personalities, or both, to challenge even our equals if we think something suspicious might be afoot. What if they get offended? What if they complain? What if our suspicions are ill-founded and we cause problems at our workplace? We have to be there all day, every day, with that person. That problem is compounded many times over if this isn't just a colleague but one of the most senior people in a huge international business. How do you safely stop a top boss who probably earns more in one day than you do in your whole lifetime and articulate a question like, "I'm sorry, but are you real? I think you might be an imposter. Can you prove your identity to me, please?" I mean, what would proof even look like? They already have the right face and the right voice, so what then? A birth certificate? A passport? At best, it might sound like you're accusing them of looking dishonest, and people have suddenly found themselves and their entire careers in the bin for far less. On paper, superiors should reward employees who are ready to ask difficult questions to protect the business. But in practice, far too many managers are insecure and will interpret such behaviour as an attack on themselves. I'm not for one moment suggesting that this is the climate at Arup. I simply don't know. But Zhang probably wouldn't have known either. It's unlikely that an office worker in Hong Kong would have spent enough time, if indeed any, with the London-based CFO to learn whether he would tolerate questions like this. And this possibility of a fragile ego is the perfect exploit for an enterprising white-collar criminal. As is so often the case in crimes involving computers, it isn't necessarily the technological weaknesses that cause the problems. It's the humans and their habits, biases, patterns, and flaws. All we need is anxious deference combined with compelling evidence, and we have a near-perfect recipe for crime. And in this case, the evidence was the face and voice of Rob Boardman, or so it seemed. What's more probable, after all, that a convincing look-alike and sound-alike is running a multi-million-dollar scam and they just happen to have picked you of everyone in a giant global organisation? Or that you're speaking to the actual CFO? And there were others on the call too, people that Zhang recognised as Arup figures and who also spoke. Perhaps a criminal enterprise might track down one really good face and voice clone, but amassing multiple is implausible, even with the help of a criminal cameos Craigslist. Of course, there is a seemingly obvious explanation. Most of us are now familiar with the idea of deepfakes, where artificial intelligence manipulates existing videos or generates entirely new ones. Just one common deepfake example involves a notable figure like a celebrity or a politician supposedly being caught on camera saying or doing something offensive, when in reality the footage is partly or fully counterfeit. But at the time of writing about this case, these examples have all been designed for passive consumption. They're effectively movies for the audience to simply watch. They are not live interactions that need to be responsive to audience feedback. Generative AI may be convincing at some tasks, but at present, when it comes to ordinary conversation, it has quite a spectacular feat to achieve. To start understanding just where the field is right now, firstly, we need to take a moment to understand a little of the history and all of the layers necessary to convincingly spoof a real person's voice. And this is just their voice, not their face as well. Let's start with the simplest option, and we've already mentioned it. Find a human being who can impersonate you. To do that, they have to either have a great deal of control over their whole vocal tract, or, more realistically, They just happen to have a vocal tract that really isn't that dissimilar to yours. As it happens, some people have more generic sounding voices, and, no surprise, that makes them easier to emulate. But being distinctive, having a distinctive voice, isn't an automatic defense against being impersonated either. Think how many Elvis Presley, Morgan Freeman, and Barack Obama tribute acts there are out there, and some of them are even somewhat convincing. So what about tech, then? Well, since the 1920s, we've had something called the vocoder. Very simplistically, the vocoder was intended to reduce the amount of bandwidth required to transmit voices over the phone. But as an accidental consequence, this had a distorting effect on the voice that came out the other side. Incidentally, the military was delighted with the way that this process presented opportunities to scramble and thus protect wartime communications. Anyway, take a few zigzagging steps forward through history and you arrive at voice changers. Clues in the name, technology deliberately designed to change the voice. You see these as toys or spy tech or superhero gadgets in plenty of films and TV shows where characters use them to sound like robots or to hide their identities or strike fear into the hearts of their enemies, or all of the above, thus otherwise complicating the plot a little further than was ever strictly necessary. Take another few steps forward, though, and you get from changing your voice in some sort of generic way, like making it lower or robotic or whatever, to changing it in a very particular way to sound like someone else, someone specific, a person who exists. On paper, that sounds like an instant win. Why bother with, complex computational modelling and algorithms and embeddings when you can just swing by a toy shop and start sounding like Obama for less than the price of a family takeout? Well, because in practice, the tech is simply not that good at all. And secondarily, even if it were that good, we are not. What I mean by that is, I could pick up the perfect Taylortron from a nearby toy shop that makes my voice sound exactly like Taylor Swift's. And yet, I don't think I would fool a devoted fan for more than a few minutes, if that. Why? Well, that's because I don't have Taylor's accent. Even if I could put accents on, which I can't, I also don't know her stress patterns, her habitual intonational contours, how she pauses, how quickly she speaks, the sorts of linguistic errors or false starts or self-interruptions she makes, whether she sounds chirpy and happy or down or just neutral, and so on. Someone who genuinely knows Taylor Swift and who speaks to her regularly enough would recognise very quickly that whilst the quality of the voice might sound right, that would be where any similarity ended. Voice conversion is, effectively, an extremely superficial veneer. It's a paper-thin mask and it falls apart very quickly under any real scrutiny. So, perhaps computers can be helpful. For instance, we could feed a high-end machine with thousands of hours of Taylor's voice so that an AI model can learn how her voice sounds and how she uses it, and then I could, in theory, type in the words and tell it to say those words out loud. Tacotron 2 does precisely this. If you'd like to go full nerd for a second, Tacotron 2 is a neural network architecture that you can use to synthesize speech directly from text with no additional prosody information. There you go. Bet you didn't know you'd be learning that today. Anyway, this is what plenty of generative AI models do now. They learn a voice, you give them a script, and with luck, those words come out sounding like your chosen person. The output could range from passable, reasonable, right through to excellent. But in our Taylor Swift example, it still may not articulate her accent correctly. Why is that? Well, before you can ask an AI to generate someone else's voice, it has to know how to speak in the first place. And to arrive at that point, it's usually pre-trained on mountains of data. That data tends to be vacuumed up en masse from the internet, and you need only think about what you find a lot of on the internet. The podcasts, the radio shows, the videos, and so on. Certain types of voices, accents, and demographics dominate. Others barely appear at all. So a generative model like Tachytron 2 will already come with an inbuilt phonology, and that phonology will tend to have been derived from white, middle-class Western males in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. In fairness, that isn't so dissimilar from Taylor Swift, but for someone primed to spot a fake, it could be enough. However, even with a state-of-the-art text-to-speech synthesis model, you still haven't made it all the way there yet. Your output may sound like Taylor and even have her accent, but we've left a major layer unconsidered. If I were typing in the speech, I would probably repeatedly screw up things like the dialectal choices, the words she uses for things like rubbish bin, and tap, and bumper, a car bumper, obviously, and so on. The nicknames she'd choose for her various people, the turns of phrases that she uses, her go-to one-liners and her in-jokes, the ways that she indicates that she's thinking, her back-channel markers to show that she's paying attention, even the topics she would choose to speak about and how and in what tone. Now again, maybe computers can help with some of this because a lot of it is content and it's countable. In theory, I could scoop up thousands of transcripts of Taylor interviews and talks and voiceovers and so on. I could have an AI model identify these patterns and learn them and generate new scripts in that same style. And then you get your synthesizer to turn that text into speech. And finally, you might have a convincing Taylor Swift voice. But you're still not done yet. Remember, we wanted to not just create a convincing spoof, we wanted to create one that could hold a conversation with a human and fool them. For this, we're going to need a crime, and for a minute, you are going to need to be a criminal. So, here's the con. You want to spend a week in a top-tier, supremely luxurious hotel, but you don't have anything like the money for it. You figure if Taylor Swift called the hotel, they'd let her stay in their finest presidential suite for free, so you hatch a plan. You're going to synthesize her voice, call the hotel, and bag yourself a first-class ticket to luxury. You can predict that when the receptionist answers, they'll probably ask how they can help, so you line up a pre-typed answer saying hi, asking to stay, hoping to keep it all low profile, and so on. But when the receptionist answers, they're a little bit skeptical. No surprise. Taylor Swift? The Taylor Swift? The Taylor Swift who's in Edinburgh right now as part of the latest concert tour? You freeze. You hadn't planned on this. The receptionist is actually wrong, the Edinburgh tour is over, but you can't just ignore him. You have to type swiftly, but also very quietly, and naturally you make a typo and you have to fix it. Meanwhile, the gap has spun out too long and the receptionist is saying, hello? Hello? You send the answer. Oh, that tour ended a few weeks ago. You're tired. You really need a break from the spotlights. The receptionist seems somewhat reassured. What a pleasure to be speaking to the real Taylor Swift. On the phone. It's very exciting. He has a cousin who is the biggest fan. Derek. Have you heard of Derek? Derek sends you lots of emails. You start typing again. No, you haven't heard of Derek. You're sorry. There are lots of Dereks out there. But again, it's taking too long and the receptionist is getting suspicious. What's the typing sound? Why are the gaps so big? Is this a scam? And it's over. All this to say, latency is a major issue. Even if you converted the receptionist's voice to text, live, jammed it directly into a different AI, had that AI construct a meaningful response as swiftly as it could, and then promptly generated the speech in return, the gap would still be too big. In conversational terms, our sensitivity to latency is extraordinary. We're regularly leaving gaps of fractions of a second. Anything in the 1 second region is considered a slight delay. 2 seconds is a long delay. 3 seconds or more, and we start to think that there's been a major miscommunication issue. And that is not the only problem. Even if you could fix the timing issue, most of our generative LLMs at the moment, these are the AIs that spit out convincing chunks of text, most of them if not really all of them, are trained on writing. This is a bigger problem than it might seem on the surface. They are not trained on speech that has been transcribed. And that is also important because it means that we're missing all kinds of things I mentioned before. Disfluencies, lags, breathing, sniffles, coughs, false starts, repetitions. And that's before we get into the fact that we don't speak the way that we write grammatically anyway. So even if you artificially inserted those features, some breathing, the odd cough, if the grammar is still the grammar of writing and not of speech, you still have traces of text left in the voice. This podcast is a perfect example of that. I write these scripts and then I read them out, and I add various features to make it sound speech-like, but fundamentally, this is text read out loud. All this might make you think that actually the risks around spoofed voices being used for scams are therefore overstated. And to that I would say, not so much. The field is leaping forward swiftly. And not every scam requires a live conversation. Plenty of fraud is committed using voice notes and voicemails. And there's more that we'll get to in a moment. In the case of something like a voicemail, there is no need for interaction, so a lot of the complexity is stripped away. And as the various speech synthesizers improve, our ability to distinguish them from human speech is also swiftly diminishing. And that takes us neatly onto bot or not. Bot or not is a quiz we came up with. By we, I mean me and Dr. Georgina Brown with the help of our researchers Amy Dixon and Hope McVean. On the surface, each version of bot or not is just a bit of fun. On the one hand, can you spot real hotel reviews from AI-generated ones? And if you want to play that one, head to the blog and you'll find a link to it. On the other hand, can you tell spoofed voices from real humans? I probably don't need to explain that, however fun these are on the surface, each one is actually addressing a very serious problem. Generative AI that produces text can be used for good, certainly, and I'll get to that right at the end because we'll need it by then. But it can also be used for creating rivers of disinformation that can lead to real offline harms, and by harms I also mean deaths. It can be used for synthesizing the style of someone to scam their loved ones. It can be used for suggesting novel ways of committing crimes or cleaning up after them. And of course, it can be used for generating millions of fake reviews to rip off unsuspecting customers into parting with their hard-earned monies for inferior or non-existent products and services. Think about it. You could run a giant, complex, one-time scam like Arab and get away with $26 million, but with all the major investigative bodies of the world screaming down the highway after you. Or you can run a $100 scam 260,000 times, get away with the same amount of money, and probably never even make it onto a local police force's radar. And arguably, if you ran this sort of con right, you could make substantially more money even than that. Now, fake reviews have existed as long as review systems have existed. Previously, you just bought those fake reviews from humans, and AI has simply made it easier and cheaper. By contrast, the criminal use of AI-generated voices to pull off scams of any scale is, relatively speaking, still in its infancy. But even so, we're now at a point where instead of answering a phone or listening to a voicemail and mentally asking ourselves, who is this person? We've now arrived at a point where we might be better to ask ourselves, is this a person? So, let's give it a go. I'm going to play you 5 very short samples. They may all be real individuals, they may all be robot imposters, they may be any mix in between. You have a simple job. Decide whether each sample is bot or not. I'll leave a long enough gap between each so that you can pause and think, and then I'll do the reveal a few seconds after the end. And if you think, well, these samples are very short, that's quite unfair. They're about the same length and in some cases quite a bit longer than the magical phrase, "My voice is my password." Okay, Are you ready? Off we go. Sample 1.
Shoppers were attracted by the heavy discounting on selected items.
Sample 2.
Bringing Owen Jess and Gary Smith back to Pedigree proved the wrong decisions.
Sample 3.
The wreckage would be of no use to any further litigation or inquiry.
Sample 4.
My goal at the start of the year was to win a major.
And finally, Sample 5.
But it took a lot of bottle.
If you want to skip back and have another listen, now's your chance. But if you feel like you're prepared for the answer, then here it is. 4 of the samples were bots. 1 was a human. If you want to go back and have another go, see if you can work out which it was. But here comes the final reveal. The human sample was the very last one. Sample 5. Uncanny, no? As that probably showed, we shouldn't be complacent around the potential uses of spoofed voices. In fact, synthesized voice tech has improved at such a pace that it poses significant global problems for how we legitimately identify each other. But it's not just an interpersonal issue around validating that the friend calling you from a strange number really is your friend. Plenty of security systems use voice identification. Banks, utility companies, building access points, and more. And a common version of this, as I've just hinted at, is using the phrase, "My voice is my password," as a way to access secure information and systems. Incidentally, there is a whole argument to be had around whether a voice is a biometric in the first place, but we're just going to leave that one alone for now. It is used as one in these contexts, and, quite frankly, that's the problem. So, biometrics. To simplify a very complex matter, biometrics turn some sort of consistent reading from you into a long string. A hash, if you like. That could be your voice, your fingerprint, your iris, your face, the veins in the back of your hand, even your ear shape. It doesn't especially matter as long as it's some part of you that's unique versus the rest of the population, that is relatively exhaustive. In other words, this is pretty much all of whatever that thing is. It's your whole eyeball, it's your whole fingerprint, and it's relatively unchanging. Anyway, biometrics are a way of turning these various reasonably stable readings into hashes. These hashes are stored in computers, and then when you next try to access your bank, you reproduce that biometric, it gets hashed again, and this new one you've just submitted is compared with the old one that's on file, and if they match, in you get. But there is a rather chilling problem here. Firstly, the owners of those hashes tend to be corporations, and honestly, corporations do not have glowing track records when it comes to ethical behaviour. Secondly, and relatedly, corporations routinely get hacked and their data gets leaked everywhere. Or worse, it doesn't get leaked because whoever took it knew exactly what they wanted from it and isn't up for some sort of Robin Hood-style sharing of the wealth. Thirdly, all profit-making entities are extremely strongly motivated to not disclose when they have experienced breaches because this almost always has an enormous impact on their profit margins as customers ditch them for supposedly safer alternatives. And fourthly, most important of all, if that corporation has been hacked, and if the biometrics databases have been copied, whether you find out or not, someone now owns copies of your biometrics. Your voice, your fingerprints, your iris, your face, whatever you submitted. And now they have those hashes, they can use them to get into any other systems protected using the same. In different and far fewer words, as a system admin, if a user ID and password database is compromised, I could automatically issue everyone with new login details. I could send you all new passwords. But if a biometrics database is compromised, I can't issue you with new fingerprints, or eyeballs, or faces. or voices. That's the issue with them being both relatively exhaustive and uniquely identifying. There's no more of that thing to draw on, and they just belonged to you. Of course, if you used just one finger for your biometric, there's a chance you have 9 more lives to go at, and if you use just one eyeball for your iris scan, you hopefully still have one left spare. But your face? Your voice? That's it. The wolves in the wires got away with it, and there's no telling what they might now do with it. It's not easy in a true crime podcast to end on a cheery note, but even for me, this is a particularly bleak one, so I'd like to just balance it up slightly. Our digital lives are being shaped by AI in lots of new and challenging ways, but some of those developments are good. In fact, not just good, they are incredible. Generative AI and synthesized voices present outstanding opportunities for people who have lost the ability to speak for whatever reason. Throat cancers, head injuries, neurological pathologies, and so on. Giving those people back not just any voice but their own voice can be life-changing. Similarly, for those who have never had a voice to begin with, these technological developments can offer a new quality of life that was simply impossible before. Globally, AI translation technologies break down barriers, and for some of the most vulnerable people on the planet. Once, communication between speakers of different languages required the investment of learning that language or the help of an interpreter, luxuries most of us can't afford, either in time or in money. But especially for displaced adults and their children, for refugees, for asylum seekers, this is invaluable in allowing them to join their new communities, understand their neighbours and their teachers, and to feel welcomed. AI tools can do much more besides. They can handle disaster responses by rapidly sending out emergency alerts in multiple languages. They can generate really nice audiobooks and narration of content, which is an especial benefit for people with reading difficulties or who are constrained by time. They can provide mental health support and meditation sessions and guidance for people struggling with anxiety or depression. They can not only subtitle and caption videos, but do so in lots of different languages, making them far more accessible than this sort of content has ever been before. They can create schedules and send reminders and read stories and play games and provide news for people who are isolated or in care homes or who need additional social support. And that's just the beginning. No surprise, this episode has focused on the dark side of AI, but as ever, the technology itself is totally agnostic. It's what we choose to do with it that counts, and it's those choices that reveal just how human we really are. This episode was researched, fact-checked, narrated, and produced by me, Professor Claire Hardacre. However, this work wouldn't exist in its current form without the prior efforts of many others. You can find acknowledgements and references for those people at the blog. Also there you can find data, links, articles, pictures, older cases, and more besides. The address for the blog is wp.lancs.ac.uk/onclair, all one word. And you can follow the podcast on Twitter at _onclair. Or, if you like, you can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Claire H.